I'm going to keep this straightforward because when you're looking at a high-end desktop, it's easy to get lost in the hype and end up with a machine that feels great on paper but falls short in the everyday moments you actually care about. If you're on the fence about spending a premium on a gaming tower, the goal of this review is to help you decide whether the Dell Tower Plus EBT2250 really delivers the performance you need without turning the rest of your setup into a headache. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the biggest hesitation most people have with a pre-built like this is the balance between raw specs and the practical experience of installing games, streaming, or even just switching between a work spreadsheet and a multiplayer session. Dell's name carries a reputation for reliable service, but the tower market has exploded with boutique builders promising no compromises. The question is, does Dell actually keep that promise, or are you paying for a name badge while the real-world usage tells a different story? The core of the Tower Plus is the Intel Core Ultra 9 285K, a 24-core processor that can turbo up to 5.7 GHz. In theory, that's a monster for any modern title, but the real test is how it handles sustained loads. In my own testing running a 1440p build of Cyberpunk 2077 while streaming on OBS and having Chrome tabs open for research, the CPU never hit a thermal throttling point, thanks in part to Dell's internal cooling layout. The fans stayed in a low to mid-range, and the system remained quiet enough that you could hear the game's ambient soundtrack without the hum becoming a distraction. That's a practical strength. You get flagship-level processing power that doesn't scream for attention when you're in a late-night session. Equally important is the 128 GB of DDR5 RAM running at 5600 MHz. Most gamers will never need that much memory, but the extra capacity shines if you also use the machine for content creation. I ran Adobe Premiere while rendering a 4K sequence and had a few background VMs active for testing network configurations. The system never stuttered, and the large RAM pool means you won't be forced to close applications just to free up space for a game. For a typical gamer who sticks to 1 or 2 titles at a time, 32 GB would be plenty, so the 128 GB is a future-proof buffer rather than a necessity, but it does remove the worry of hitting a ceiling later. Now let's talk graphics. The RTX 5060 with 8 GB of GDDR7 memory is positioned as a mid-range GPU, but it's a step up from the older RTX 3060 series you see in many builds. In practice, it handles 1080p ultra settings with ease, and at 1440p you can push most titles into high-plus territory while maintaining 6070 frames per second. I tested Elden Ring and Valorant back-to-back. The former stayed smooth at 1440p with ray tracing off, and the latter hit well over 150 frames per second with all visual tweaks maxed. The practical upside is clear. You get a card that will stay viable for at least 2 more years before you feel the need to upgrade for new releases. One hidden trade-off is the number and type of ports. The tower offers 3 DisplayPort outputs and 1 HDMI, which is great if you have a multi-monitor rig. However, all the USB-C options are missing, and you're left with 5 USB 3.2 Type-A and 4 USB 2.0 ports. If you rely on newer peripherals that prefer USB-C like the latest external SSDs or certain VR headsets, you'll need an adapter. It's not a deal-breaker, but it's a small inconvenience that can add cost and clutter to your desk. Storage is a 1 TB PCIe NVMe SSD. That's fast enough for rapid game loads and OS boot times, and the extra speed over SATA drives is noticeable when you launch large worlds. The downside is the capacity. A modern AAA library can easily fill 1 TB, especially if you also store video projects or large mod packs. Upgrading the drive later is straightforward thanks to the open chassis, but you'll need to budget for an additional SSD if you plan on keeping everything on a single machine. Another practical aspect is the included keyboard and mouse. Dell's wired keyboard is functional, with decent key travel and a layout that won't feel foreign to anyone used to a standard desktop set. The mouse is basic but responsive enough for both gaming and everyday use. If you're a tactile enthusiast who prefers mechanical switches or a high DPI gaming mouse, you'll likely replace them quickly. That's not a flaw in the product, it's just a way Dell keeps the bundle price reasonable while assuming most buyers will customize their peripherals anyway. Reliability is where Dell's brand really shows its weight. The 2-year warranty from Techno Intelligence, paired with free tech support, gives a safety net that many boutique builds don't provide. When a component does fail, you have a clear path to a replacement rather than hunting down a third-party service. That peace of mind is part of the value you're paying for.